Welcome to a story of survival, defiance, and forbidden love set against the brutal realities of England's rural aristocracy. This is the journey of a woman who entered a duke's estate as payment for debt and left as its savior. If you're ready to witness courage triumph over cruelty, stay with us until the very end, hit that like button, and tell us in the comments what city you're watching from. Let's begin. The rain hammered against the windows of the Whitford townhouse like fists demanding entry. Inside, the silence was worse than any storm. Elara Whitford stood in the doorway of her father's study, watching him crumble. Thomas Whitford, once a proud merchant whose ships brought silks from the east and wines from the continent, sat hunched over his desk like a man already dead. His hands trembled as they gripped a letter edged in black wax, the seal of the Duke of Ravenmore. "How much?" Elara's voice cut through the stillness, steady despite the tightness in her chest. Her father didn't look up. £300. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. £300. More than most families saw in a lifetime. More than her father could ever repay. "And if you don't pay?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Debtor's prison." His voice cracked. "They'll take the house. Your mother's grave will be neglected. Your brothers will be turned out into the streets. Everything we've built, gone." Elara moved closer, her skirts whispering against the worn carpet. She was 22 years old, unmarried, educated far beyond what society deemed appropriate for a woman. Her mother had taught her to read ledgers before she could properly write her name. Her father had brought her to the docks, let her negotiate with ship captains and warehouse masters while other girls learned embroidery and French. Now that education would save them, or destroy her. "The Duke," she said carefully. "What does he want?" Thomas finally looked up, and the shame in his eyes told her everything. "A companion, for 2 years. He's willing to forgive the debt in exchange for service." The word tasted like poison. Service. They both knew what that meant. Not a maid or a cook. Those positions had dignity, wages, freedom. A companion was something else entirely. A living ornament. A creature to be displayed, used, and discarded when her novelty wore off. "Has he specified the terms?" Elara asked, her merchant's mind already working through the transaction like it was a shipment of tea or tobacco. Her father slid the letter across the desk. Elara read it once, then again, her sharp eyes catching every nuance, every carefully chosen word. "In exchange for the sum of £300 and associated interest, I require a lady's companion of good breeding and education for a period of 2 years to reside at Ravenmore Estate. She will attend to correspondence, manage household matters as directed, and provide appropriate company. Room, board, and modest allowances will be provided. At the conclusion of service, the debt will be considered fully satisfied." "He doesn't even use my name," Elara said softly. "I'm just a thing to be acquired." "You don't have to do this," her father said, but they both knew he was lying. "We could sell the house, start over somewhere." "With what?" Elara set the letter down with deliberate precision. "Father, we both know there's nothing left to sell. The creditors have already claimed the warehouse, the ships, even Mother's jewelry. This house is mortgaged 3 times over. If we don't accept this, they'll take you tomorrow. I won't let you sacrifice yourself for my failures." "It's not sacrifice." Elara lifted her chin, forcing steel into her voice. "It's a business arrangement. 2 years of my life for my family's survival. Merchants make harder trades every day." But as she said the words, her hands clenched behind her back, fingernails biting into her palms. 2 years. 730 days in the service of a man she'd never met, in a place so remote that even the gossips of London spoke of it in whispers. Ravenmore Estate, the edge of civilization, where the Yorkshire moors stretched wild and unforgiving. They said Duke Adrian Blackthorne was a recluse, a man who'd abandoned London society after some scandal no one could quite remember. They said his estate was crumbling, his staff surly and resentful, his temper as cold as the northern winters. They said a lot of things. Most of them, Elara suspected, were exaggerations designed to make bored aristocrats feel superior. But some part of her, the part that had learned to read the truth beneath men's words in business negotiations, wondered if the rumors were warnings she should heed. When does he expect an answer? She asked. Tomorrow. Her father's voice broke. The coach leaves at dawn. If you agree, you'll be gone before the week is out. Elara walked to the window, pressing her forehead against the cold glass. Outside, London churned with life. Street vendors calling their wares, carriages rattling over cobblestones, lamplighters beginning their evening rounds. This city had been her entire world. Now she would trade it for isolation and servitude. I'll write the acceptance letter tonight, she said. Elara. Father? She turned, and for a moment she looked exactly like her mother, the same fierce intelligence, the same unbreakable spine. We don't have a choice. But that doesn't mean I'm going as a victim. I'm going as a Whitford, and Whitfords don't break. 3 days later, Elara stood in the entrance hall with a single trunk containing everything she was allowed to bring. 2 dresses, 1 pair of good boots, her mother's silver locket, and hidden at the bottom, wrapped in oilcloth, a leather-bound ledger, and her father's old account books. If she was going to survive 2 years in a strange house, she'd need to understand how it ran. And knowledge, her mother had always said, was the only currency that never devalued. Her younger brother Jamie clung to her skirts, tears streaming down his 10-year-old face. Don't go, Ellie, please don't go. She knelt, gathering him close. Listen to me. You're the man of the house now. You take care of father, you hear me? And when I come back, I expect you to be taller than me and twice as smart. What if you don't come back? I will. She pressed a kiss to his forehead. I promise, 2 years, 730 days, and then I'm home. But even as she made the promise, doubt gnawed at her. What if the Duke changed his mind? What if 2 years became 5, became 10, became forever? What if she walked out this door and vanished into the moors like smoke? The coach arrived precisely at dawn, black lacquer gleaming despite the drizzle. No crest, no announcement, just a driver who barely glanced at her before loading her trunk. A deliberate insult. She wasn't important enough for ceremony. As the coach rolled north, London fell away behind her. The bustling streets gave way to open countryside, then to rougher terrain. Towns became villages. Villages became scattered farms. And finally, even those disappeared into endless stretches of heather and stone. They traveled for 3 days, stopping only at coaching inns where Elara ate alone in her room and listened to the drivers gossip about the poor girl being sent to Ravenmoor. Apparently, her situation was common knowledge among those who served the aristocracy. Another merchant's daughter sold off to settle debts. Another transaction in the great ledger of English class and privilege. On the 4th day, the landscape turned truly hostile. The moors stretched in every direction, vast and empty beneath a sky the color of bruises. Wind howled across the heather, carrying rain that felt like needles against exposed skin. This was the world beyond civilization's edge, beautiful in its brutality, indifferent to human suffering. Elara pressed her face to the coach window, refusing to look away. If this was to be her prison, she would know every inch of it. Then, cresting a rise, she saw it. Ravenmoor Estate. It sprawled across the landscape like a fortress, all gray stone and sharp angles. Wings extended in both directions from a central keep that looked more medieval than modern. Smoke rose from a few chimneys, but most of the windows were dark. Overgrown gardens surrounded the main house, and beyond those she could see outbuildings, stables, storage sheds, what might have been a greenhouse with half its glass panes shattered. This wasn't the elegant country seat she'd imagined. This was a working estate, raw and functional and barely maintained. The coach rolled to a stop in the courtyard. Elara waited, expecting a footman or housekeeper to greet her. Instead, the driver simply unloaded her trunk, touched his cap, and climbed back onto his seat. "Wait," Elara called. "Shouldn't someone—" "Not my concern, miss." He gathered the reins. "I was paid to deliver you. Consider yourself delivered." And with that, he was gone, leaving Elara alone in the rain with her single trunk and the vast, indifferent house looming before her. For a long moment, she stood frozen. This was madness. She should run, flee back down the road toward civilization, take her chances with poverty rather than this bleak isolation. But then she remembered Jamie's tears, her father's broken shoulders, the creditors circling like vultures. She picked up her trunk, heavy but manageable if she used the handles properly, and walked toward the main entrance. The door opened before she could knock. A woman stood in the doorway, 60 if she was a day, with iron-gray hair and a face carved from the same stone as the house. She wore black from collar to hem, and her eyes swept over Elara with the efficiency of someone cataloging livestock. "Miss Whitford." Not a question, a statement of fact, delivered with all the warmth of a January frost. "I am Mrs. Hodge, the housekeeper. You're late." "The coach?" "I don't care about the coach." Mrs. Hodge stepped aside. "Inside. You're letting in the cold." Elara hauled her trunk over the threshold and found herself in an entrance hall that could have swallowed her father's entire house. Stone floors, wood-paneled walls, a staircase wide enough for 4 people to walk abreast. But everything was dark. The paneling blackened with age, the floors unpolished, the air thick with the smell of old smoke and older neglect. "This way." Mrs. Hodge moved with brisk efficiency, not bothering to see if Elara followed. "His Grace is occupied with the eastern pastures. You'll meet him at dinner. Until then, you'll remain in your quarters and review your duties." "What exactly are my duties?" Elara asked, struggling to keep pace while dragging her trunk. Mrs. Hodge didn't slow. "His Grace will explain. I'm here to manage the house, not you. Leave the trunk. Someone will fetch it later." Elara obeyed but noted immediately that the someone would likely be her. She'd seen no servants, heard no sounds of activity. Whatever Ravenmore had once been, it was running on a skeleton staff now. They climbed 2 flights of stairs, passed through corridors where portraits of stern-faced ancestors watched with disapproving eyes, and finally stopped at a door near the end of the eastern wing. "Your room." Mrs. Hodge produced a key, unlocked the door, and pushed it open. "Dinner is at 7 sharp. Don't be late. His Grace despises unpunctuality." She left without another word, her footsteps echoing away into the vast silence of the house. Elara stepped into her new quarters and felt her heart sink further. It wasn't a servant's room. The bed was too fine for that, the furnishings too elegant, but it wasn't a guest room either. Everything was clean but cold, functional but unwelcoming. A narrow bed with plain linens, a washstand and mirror. A writing desk positioned by the window, currently covered in a thick layer of dust. The window itself looked out over the moors, stretching endlessly toward a horizon lost in mist. This was what 300 pounds bought. This room, this isolation, this exile from everything she'd ever known. Elara sat on the bed and permitted herself exactly 1 minute of despair. 1 minute to feel the full weight of what she'd done, to acknowledge the fear coiling in her chest like a living thing. Then she stood up, straightened her shoulders, and began to unpack. If she was going to survive 2 years in this place, she needed to understand it. The house, the staff, the Duke himself. All of them were puzzles to be solved, and Elara Whitford had never met a puzzle she couldn't crack. She cleaned the desk first, using water from the washstand and a corner of her petticoat since no one had provided cleaning supplies. Then she arranged her mother's ledger and her father's account books, her writing materials, everything that connected her to the world of commerce and logic she understood. At precisely 7 o'clock, she made her way back downstairs following the route Mrs. Hodge had taken. The house was a labyrinth, but Elara had always had an excellent memory for spatial relationships. She counted doors, noted landmarks, a painting of hounds, a chair with 1 broken arm, a window that rattled when the wind hit it from the north. The dining room was easy to find. Just follow the smell of food and the flicker of candlelight. She paused in the doorway, taking in the scene. The room itself was magnificent, with soaring ceilings and windows that must have offered spectacular views in daylight. A table long enough to seat 30 people dominated the space, but only 2 places were set. One at the head, one to its right. And at the head of the table sat the Duke of Ravenmore. Adrian Blackthorne was not what she expected. The gossips had painted him as some kind of Gothic villain, dark, brooding, possibly scarred or deformed. Instead, she saw a man perhaps 35 years old, lean and weathered like someone who spent more time outdoors than in drawing rooms. His hair was dark and overlong, tied back carelessly. His face was sharp-featured and intelligent, with eyes the color of winter storms. He wore no coat, no cravat, just shirt sleeves and a waistcoat, as if he'd come directly from physical labor and couldn't be bothered with formality. Those storm-gray eyes lifted as she entered, and for a moment they simply assessed each other. Elara refused to drop her gaze. She'd negotiated with ship captains and warehouse masters who tried to intimidate her with their size and authority. A duke was just another man trying to establish dominance. Miss Whitford, his voice was rough, unused to social pleasantries. You arrived. As contracted, Your Grace. Sit. He gestured to the chair at his right. We'll discuss your role while we eat. Elara moved to the chair, aware that he was watching her every step. Looking for weakness? For signs of fear? She gave him neither, sitting with the same composure she'd learned from years of attending her father's business dinners. A woman Elara hadn't seen before emerged from a side door, young, perhaps 16, wearing a maid's uniform that had been mended dozens of times. She set down 2 plates of plain but well-cooked food, roasted chicken, root vegetables, bread. Thank you, Mary, the Duke said, and the girl bobbed a curtsy before disappearing. So there was at least one other servant. Elara filed the information away. I'll be direct, Adrian said, cutting into his chicken with practiced efficiency. You're here because your father owes me money. I could have taken it in property or goods, but I needed something else. Someone else. A companion, Elara said evenly. Yes. He met her eyes again. You've read the terms? Thoroughly. Then you know I expect 2 years of service. In exchange, your father's debt is cleared and he keeps his house. But understand this, Miss Whitford. I'm not some London dandy looking for entertainment. This estate is failing. My steward died 6 months ago, and every man I've hired since has proven incompetent, corrupt, or both. The accounts are a disaster. The tenants are behind on rents. Half my livestock died last winter because no one thought to properly maintain the shelters. Elara's merchant instincts sharpened. You need a steward, not a companion. I need someone intelligent enough to spot problems, and brave enough to tell me about them. Every man I hire comes with assumptions about how a duke's estate should run, usually assumptions that involve them skimming off the top while I'm distracted. You, Miss Whitford, are here as payment for debt. That means you have no illusions about your position, no expectations of preferential treatment, and most importantly, no connections to the local gentry who've been bleeding me dry. You want me to manage your accounts? Elara asked, incredulous despite herself. I want you to learn this estate inside and out. The house, the lands, the people. I want you to find where the problems are and report them to me. I want someone who can organize correspondence, manage the household accounts, and understand when someone is lying to my face. Why me? Why not hire? Because everyone I hire wants something from me. Status, connections, money beyond their wages. You're different. You're here because you have to be, which means you'll work twice as hard to prove you're worth keeping. And when the 2 years are up, you'll leave with your family's debt cleared and no reason to ever think of this place again. It was, Elara realized, the most honest thing anyone in power had ever said to her. No pretty lies about companionship or mutual benefit, just the brutal reality of transaction. And if I refuse? She asked. If I say this isn't what I agreed to? Adrian set down his knife and fork. Then you can leave tomorrow. The debt remains, and your father faces the consequences. But I suspect you won't refuse, Miss Whitford. You didn't come all this way just to run at the first sign of real work. He was right, damn him. What about Mrs. Hodge? Elara asked, changing tactics. She's your housekeeper. Shouldn't she manage? Mrs. Hodge manages what happens inside these walls. I need someone who can move between the house and the estate operations. Someone who understands numbers and isn't afraid to get their hands dirty. He paused. I've read your father's business records. Before his collapse, Thomas Whitford ran a shipping empire that required tracking cargo across 3 continents. I assume he taught you some of those skills. Elara's surprise must have shown, because Adrian's mouth curved in something that might have been amusement. Did you think I took you sight unseen? I know exactly who you are, Miss Whitford. Educated beyond your station, unmarried because you spent your youth in warehouses instead of ballrooms, raised by a merchant who valued your brain more than your marriage prospects. In London, you're a cautionary tale. Here, you might actually be useful. It should have been insulting. Instead, it was the first time in her life anyone in power had acknowledged her abilities as assets rather than deformities. I'll need access to all accounts, Elara said carefully. Estate records, tenant agreements, supplier contracts, staff wages, everything. Granted, my study tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock, I'll show you the books. And my authority? If I find problems, if I need to make changes, you report to me, I make the decisions. But if you can prove someone's stealing or that we're wasting money on incompetence, I'll act on it. He picked up his fork again. Anything else? Just one question, Your Grace. Ask. Why are you doing this? Running this estate yourself instead of from London, like every other aristocrat. You could hire a competent steward, spend your time in comfort, and never see this place except for hunting parties. For the first time, something shifted in Adrian's expression. Not anger exactly, but a tightening around his eyes that suggested she'd touched a nerve. Because this land and these people are my responsibility, he said quietly. My father treated them like props in his lifestyle, bleeding the estate dry to fund London entertainments. When he died, I inherited a title, a crumbling house, and 50 families depending on me for their livelihoods. I can't fix this from a London drawing room, Miss Whitford. I can only fix it by being here, doing the work, refusing to let it fail. It was the answer of someone who took duty seriously, perhaps too seriously, judging by the exhaustion evident in every line of his body. Then I'll help you, Elara said, not because I want to, but because we made an agreement 2 years. At the end of it, my family is free and I can go home. Fair enough. Adrian raised his glass in a mock toast, to business arrangements and mutual benefit. Elara raised her own glass but didn't drink. One more thing, Your Grace. If I'm to work for you, I need to be clear about something. I came here as payment for debt, and I'll fulfill that obligation honorably. But I'm not property to be used however you see fit. My labor, my intelligence, those are yours for 2 years. Nothing else. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Adrian set his glass down with careful precision. Are you implying? I'm stating a boundary, Elara interrupted, meeting his gaze without flinching. In my experience, when powerful men acquire women through debt, assumptions get made. I'm correcting those assumptions now before they become problems. For a long moment, Adrian stared at her with an expression she couldn't read. Anger? Offense? Grudging respect? Then, unexpectedly, he laughed, a harsh, rusty sound like he'd forgotten how. God's blood, your father should have sent you to negotiate his contracts. You'd have terrified his competitors into submission. He stood, towering over her. Your concerns are noted and respected, Miss Whitford. You're here to work, nothing more. Is that clear enough? Yes, Your Grace. Good. Now finish your dinner and get some rest. Tomorrow we start at dawn, and I promise you, the work won't be gentle. He strode out of the dining room, leaving Elara alone with her cold chicken and the overwhelming sense that she'd just survived her first real test. She finished her meal slowly, thinking through everything she'd learned. The Duke wasn't a villain. He was an exhausted man trying to hold together something too large for one person to manage. The estate was failing not from cruelty, but from neglect and poor management. And she, improbably, had just been handed real authority to fix it. If she succeeded, she could go home with her family's debt cleared and genuine experience managing a complex operation. If she failed, well, failure wasn't an option. Elara made her way back to her room, navigating the dark corridors with growing confidence. Tomorrow she'd begin learning the estate systems, finding the cracks, identifying solutions. It was just like managing her father's shipping business, except instead of cargo and contracts, she'd be managing land, livestock, and people. She could do this. She had to do this. As she prepared for bed, Elara caught her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand. She looked older than her 22 years, harder. Good. Softness wouldn't survive in this place. Outside, the wind howled across the moors, and somewhere in the distance she heard the cry of something wild and untamed. Welcome to Ravenmoor, she thought grimly. Let's see which one of us breaks first. Dawn came cold and unforgiving, the kind of morning that made every breath visible and turned ungloved fingers numb within minutes. Elara woke to the sound of hoofbeats in the courtyard below, followed by men's voices raised in what sounded like an argument. She dressed quickly in her plainest gown, already realizing it was far too fine for whatever work awaited her, and made her way downstairs. The entrance hall was chaos. Mud tracked across the stone floors. 3 men in work clothes stood in a tight cluster, their faces red with either cold or anger. And in the center of it all stood Adrian, still in riding clothes, his boots caked with what looked like half the moor. "Telling you it's not possible," one of the men was saying, a burly fellow with a graying beard. "The north pasture's waterlogged. We can't move the sheep there until it drains, and that won't happen until spring." "Then drain it faster," Adrian said, his voice deadly calm. "Dig channels, build barriers, I don't care what it takes. Those sheep can't stay where they are. The grass is depleted, and they're already showing signs of malnutrition." "With what men? With what equipment? You've cut our crew to nothing." "I've cut incompetents who were stealing supplies and selling them in the village," Adrian interrupted. "If you'd been doing your job properly, Miller, we'd have twice the staff we needed. Instead, I'm left with 3 men trying to do the work of 10. Elara recognized the dynamic immediately. She'd seen it 100 times in her father's warehouses. Workers blaming management for problems they'd helped create. Management unable to trust anyone after repeated betrayals. A death spiral of resentment and suspicion. "Your Grace," she spoke clearly, stepping forward. All 4 men turned to stare at her. "Forgive the interruption. I was told to meet you at 9 to review the accounts." Miller's eyes raked over her with undisguised contempt. "This the new companion we've been hearing about? Bit early in the day for entertaining, ain't it?" The casual disrespect made Elara's blood boil, but she kept her expression neutral. Showing anger would only confirm their assumptions. Adrian's face darkened. "You'll address Miss Whitford with respect, or you'll find yourself joining the men I've already dismissed. Now get out of my sight and figure out the drainage problem. I want solutions by this afternoon, not excuses." Miller opened his mouth as if to argue, thought better of it, and jerked his head at his companions. They filed out, muttering among themselves. Elara caught the word whore whispered just loud enough to be heard. "I apologize for that," Adrian said once they were gone. "The men are resistant to change." "They think I'm here to warm your bed," Elara said bluntly, "and they resent you for it because they think you're wasting money on frivolities while cutting their wages." "I haven't cut their wages. I've cut their opportunities for theft. They don't see the difference. To them, you're a duke playing at being a farmer while some merchant's daughter enjoys luxuries they can't afford." She met his startled gaze. "I'm not saying they're right. I'm saying that's what they believe, and belief shapes behavior." Adrian studied her for a long moment. "You have a merchant's way of seeing things. I have a realist's way. And the reality is that every person in this house and on this estate is going to assume the worst about why I'm here. I can either spend 2 years fighting those assumptions, or I can make myself so useful they can't afford to dismiss me." "And how do you propose to do that?" "Let me see those accounts. Then we'll find out." Adrian's study was as Spartan as the rest of the house. A massive desk buried under papers, shelves lined with ledgers and estate maps, windows that looked out over the eastern pastures. He cleared a space on the desk and hauled over 3 leather-bound account books, each one thick enough to serve as a doorstop. "The estate ledger, the household accounts, and the tenant rolls," he said. "The last competent recording was 6 months ago. Everything since then is—" He gestured helplessly at the chaos. "Approximations at best." Elara opened the estate ledger and felt her heart sink. The entries were a disaster, dates out of order, amounts scratched out and rewritten, entire pages torn out leaving gaps in the record. Whoever had kept these books had either been incompetent or deliberately obfuscating. She pulled out her own ledger and a pen. "I need to understand the structure before I can fix the details. Tell me about the estate's revenue streams." For the next 3 hours, Adrian walked her through Raven Moore's economy. Tenant farms that paid rent in both coin and kind. Sheep that provided wool for market. Timber rights in the forest to the south. A small but productive apple orchard. Even a stone quarry that had been profitable until safety concerns shut it down. It should have been enough to sustain the estate comfortably. Instead, they were hemorrhaging money. "Here," Elara tapped an entry in the household accounts. "You're paying £30 a month for candles. That's enough to light a palace, not a country house where half the rooms are closed. Mrs. Hodge handles household purchases. Then Mrs. Hodge is either incompetent or part of the problem." Elara flipped through more pages. "Meat purchases from a supplier in York when you have tenant farmers raising livestock. fabric from London when there are perfectly good weavers in the village. Someone is skimming the difference between local prices and luxury goods, then pocketing the extra. Adrian's jaw tightened. You're certain? I'd need to verify the actual deliveries against these invoices, but yes. This pattern repeats across every category: food, supplies, even basic maintenance. You're being charged for quality you're not receiving. I trusted her. She's been with this estate for 30 years, which means she's had 30 years to build relationships with suppliers who give her kickbacks. Elara softened her tone slightly. I'm not saying she's evil, Your Grace. I'm saying the system is designed to allow this kind of corruption, and people will always take what they can get away with. Adrian stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Outside, the moors stretched endlessly under a gray sky. If I can't trust my own housekeeper, who can I trust? No one. That's the point of having someone like me review everything. She closed the ledger. But confronting Mrs. Hodge directly will only make her defensive. I need time to build a complete picture, verify the patterns, gather evidence she can't deny. How long? 2 weeks? Maybe 3? I'll need access to all storage areas, permission to inventory everything, and cooperation from the staff, which I won't get unless you order it. Adrian turned back to her, and for a moment Elara saw the full weight of what he carried. This wasn't just about money. It was about people's livelihoods, about an inheritance he was desperate not to destroy, about duty crushing a man who refused to abandon it. Do what you need to do, he said quietly. But be careful. Mrs. Hodge has allies in this house, and they won't take kindly to a newcomer threatening their arrangements. Elara spent the rest of the day conducting an inventory of the main storage areas. The root cellar, the pantry, the linen closets, all of them supposedly stocked according to Mrs. Hodge's meticulous records. All of them actually half empty, with the best items mysteriously vanished. Mary, the young maid from dinner, helped reluctantly at first, then with growing confidence as she realized Elara wasn't there to punish her. It's always been this way, Mary said as they counted blankets in the linen closet. The records claimed 50 wool blankets. They found 23. Mrs. Hodge says the Duke don't notice, and what he don't notice can't hurt him. Does she sell the extras? To her sister in the village, gets half what they're worth, but half is better than nothing, innit? Mary bit her lip. I shouldn't be telling you this. You're just being honest. Elara made a note in her ledger. And honesty is going to save everyone a lot of trouble. Tell me, Mary, do you like working here? It's work, miss. Better than the alternatives. But if you could choose, would you want this place to succeed? To be somewhere people are treated fairly and paid properly? Mary looked at her like she'd suggested flying to the moon. That ain't how things work for people like us. It could be, if someone actually cared enough to make it happen. The girl's expression shifted from skepticism to something fragile and dangerous. Hope. You really think you can change things? I think I can try, but I'll need people willing to tell me the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. Elara met her eyes. Can I count on you? Mary hesitated, then nodded once. It was a small victory, but Elara would take it. Over the next week, she worked methodically through every system in the house. She discovered that the cook was charging for premium cuts of meat, but serving cheaper alternatives. That the groundskeeper claimed to employ 6 men, but only 3 ever showed up for work. That repairs supposedly completed months ago had never been started, and through it all she felt the weight of hostile eyes watching her every move. The other servants avoided her, except when absolutely necessary. Mrs. Hodge answered her questions with icy politeness that barely concealed rage. The few estate workers she encountered treated her with open contempt, as if her very presence was an insult. They think you're a spy, Mary whispered one afternoon as they inventoried the wine cellar. Mrs. Hodge told everyone you're trying to get people fired so the Duke will give you their positions. That's ridiculous. I don't want anyone's position. Doesn't matter what you want, matters what they believe. Mary glanced nervously toward the cellar stairs. You should be careful, miss. People here don't take kindly to outsiders causing trouble. That night, Elara found a dead rat in her wash basin. The next morning, her breakfast arrived ice cold with a hair deliberately placed on top of the bread. Someone moved her ledgers, hiding them in a different room. Her chamber pot disappeared entirely, forcing her to walk 3 floors down to find a water closet. small cruelties designed to drive her away, to prove she didn't belong. Adrian noticed. If you want to leave, I'll arrange transportation back to London. The debt will remain, but I won't force you to endure harassment. They were in the stables where Elara had come to inventory the tack and equipment. Adrian was supposed to be inspecting a lame horse, but he'd found her instead, methodically counting saddles while trying to ignore the stable hand's whispered insults. I'm not leaving, Elara said firmly. I made a commitment, and I keep my commitments. Besides, if I run every time someone leaves a dead rat in my room, I'll never get anything done. They did what? Adrian's voice went dangerously quiet. It doesn't matter. It's just intimidation. It matters to me. He strode toward the stable entrance, clearly intending to drag someone back for punishment. Elara caught his arm. Stop. Think about what you're doing. I'm protecting someone under my protection. You're proving their point. She forced him to meet her eyes. If you punish them for harassing me, it confirms I'm exactly what they think I am. A woman using her position with you to exercise power over them. They'll resent me more, and the harassment will get worse, just more careful. Then what do you suggest? Let me handle it my way. Give me time. Adrian looked like he wanted to argue, but finally nodded. 2 weeks. If things don't improve, I'm intervening whether you like it or not. The opportunity to prove herself came 3 days later in the worst possible way. Elara was in the east pasture with Miller and his crew, trying to understand the drainage problem firsthand. The ground squelched under her boots, mud sucking at her hem despite her attempts to hitch up her skirts. The workers watched her struggle with barely concealed amusement. City girl's gonna ruin her fancy dress, one of them muttered. Elara ignored him, focusing on the lay of the land. Water pooled in a low area near the center of the pasture, exactly as Miller had described. But something about the pattern bothered her. The water should drain naturally toward the stream at the eastern edge, unless something was blocking the flow. Show me where the water was before the flooding, she said. Miller pointed to a line of rocks marking the old boundary. Stream ran along there, clear and fast. Now it's backed up, and the whole pasture's a bog. Elara walked the length of the stream, her boots sinking ankle-deep in places. The workers didn't follow, content to watch her flounder. Good. She needed them distracted. Halfway down the streambed, she found it. A crude dam built from rocks and branches, deliberately placed to divert water back into the pasture. It looked natural enough at first glance, the kind of debris that might accumulate after a storm, but the placement was too precise, too effective. Someone had sabotaged the drainage deliberately. Who maintains this pasture? She called back to Miller. Hargrove's crew. Though they ain't been out here in weeks, what with all the chaos. And who benefits if the sheep can't graze here? Miller's eyes narrowed. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting someone wanted this pasture flooded, maybe to hide incompetence, maybe to create problems they could then charge extra to fix. She pointed at the dam. This didn't happen naturally. Someone built it. That's a serious accusation, miss. Then let's test it. Elara waded into the stream, freezing water immediately soaking through her skirts, and began pulling apart the dam. Rocks came away easily, branches cracked and fell. Within minutes, water began flowing freely again, draining away from the pasture. The workers stared in stunned silence. There. Elara climbed back onto solid ground, shivering and soaked but triumphant. Give it a day and the water level should drop significantly. Give it 3 and you can move the sheep. Miller approached the stream, examining the remains of the dam. His expression shifted from skepticism to grudging respect. I'll be damned. Someone did block it deliberate. Find out who had access to this area in the last month, Elara said, and check the other pastures for similar problems. If someone's sabotaging one area, they might be doing it elsewhere. She turned to walk back toward the house, trying to maintain dignity despite looking like she'd been dragged through a swamp. Miss Whitford. She stopped. Miller was watching her with something that wasn't quite respect, but wasn't contempt either. That was smart work, he said gruffly, even if you did ruin a perfectly good dress doing it. It was the closest thing to approval she'd received from anyone on the estate. Elara allowed herself a small smile. I'll add it to the household expenses under drainage inspection equipment. His Grace can decide if it's worth the cost. The men actually laughed. Real laughter, not the mocking kind. By the time she reached the house, Elara was shaking with cold and exhaustion. Mrs. Hodge met her in the entrance hall, took one look at her muddy-soaked condition, and sniffed with obvious displeasure. "You'll track filth all through the house. Then I'll clean it myself," Elara said evenly, "after I change into dry clothes and stop shivering long enough to hold a mop." She climbed the stairs, leaving muddy footprints she fully intended to scrub away later. In her room, she peeled off the ruined dress and stood shaking in her chemise, trying to remember how to feel her fingers. A knock at the door. Mary entered carrying towels and, unexpectedly, a pot of hot tea. "Thought you might need these," the girl said shyly. "Heard what you did? The men are talking about it in the servants' hall." "Saying what?" Elara wrapped herself in a towel, teeth chattering. "That maybe you ain't completely useless." Mary poured tea with careful precision. "It's a start, miss. More than most outsiders get." That night at dinner, Adrian was quieter than usual. They ate in companionable silence until he finally spoke. "Miller reported your discovery. The north pasture is already draining." "Good." "He also mentioned you waded into a freezing stream in November without hesitation." Adrian's tone was carefully neutral. "That was reckless." "That was necessary. They needed to see I'm not afraid of hard work or getting dirty." She met his gaze. "I can review ledgers all day, Your Grace, but until they see me prove myself in their world, I'm just a London girl playing at being useful." "You could have caught pneumonia." "I could have, but I didn't." She sipped her wine. "Besides, you do the same thing every day, working alongside men who resent you, risking injury to prove you're not just a title. Don't lecture me about recklessness when you're drowning in it yourself." Something flickered in Adrian's expression. Surprise, maybe even respect. "Fair point." "I completed the inventory," Elara continued, pulling out her ledger. "The discrepancies are worse than I thought. Based on what should be here versus what actually is, someone has stolen approximately 400 pounds worth of goods in the last year alone." Adrian's knuckles went white around his fork. 400 pounds? At minimum. Some items are harder to value, and I'm certain there are additional thefts I haven't uncovered yet. She slid the ledger across the table. "The pattern points clearly to Mrs. Hodge and a network of suppliers who inflate invoices and split the difference, but proving it in a way that will hold up if challenged. That requires more time." "How much time?" "Another week, maybe 2. I need to catch them in an active transaction, get documentation they can't explain away." Adrian closed the ledger with deliberate care. "Do it." "But Elara—" He used her given name for the first time, and the intimacy of it made her breath catch. "Be careful. You've made an enemy of the most powerful person in this household after me. Mrs. Hodge has been here longer than I've been alive. She won't go quietly." "I know." Elara retrieved her ledger. "But neither will I." The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning, 2 weeks after Elara's arrival. She'd risen early to check a delivery from the butcher, one of the suppliers she suspected of overcharging. The invoice claimed 100 pounds of premium beef. What arrived was closer to 60 pounds of mediocre quality meat. Elara confronted the delivery man in the courtyard, ledger in hand. "This doesn't match the invoice." "Take it up with Mrs. Hodge," the man said, already turning away. "I just deliver what I'm told." "I'm taking it up with you. Either you go back and bring the correct amount, or I reject the delivery and His Grace finds a new supplier." The man's face reddened. "You got no authority." "I have the authority of someone who can read a contract and count to 100. Elara stood her ground. "Now, are you going to fix this, or am I telling His Grace that you've been shorting deliveries and splitting the difference with his housekeeper?" A window slammed open above them. Mrs. Hodge leaned out, her face contorted with fury. "How dare you interfere with household operations? These arrangements have been in place for years." "These arrangements are theft," Elara called back, "and they end today." "You presumptuous little—" Mrs. Hodge disappeared from the window. 30 seconds later, she erupted into the courtyard like a vengeful storm, with half the household staff trailing behind her. "You will not undermine my authority in this house," Mrs. Hodge snarled. "I have served the Blackthorne family for 3 decades. "And you've been stealing from them for at least one of those decades," Elara shot back. "I have documentation, invoices that don't match deliveries, suppliers charging double the market rate, Goods that mysteriously disappear from storage only to turn up in your sister's shop in the village. Do you want me to continue? The courtyard went silent. Even the delivery man looked shocked. Mrs. Hodge's face went from red to white. You have no proof. I have your ledgers. I have testimony from Mary and 2 other servants willing to confirm the thefts. I have invoices with forged signatures. Elara's voice was steel. What I don't have is patience for people who betray trust and steal from those who depend on them. His Grace will never believe some merchant's whore over. The slap came so fast that Elara barely saw Mrs. Hodge move. Pain exploded across her cheek and she staggered back, tasting blood. For a moment, everyone froze. Then Adrian's voice cut through the stunned silence like a blade. What in the name of all that's holy is going on here? He strode into the courtyard, still in riding clothes, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. His eyes swept over the scene. Elara holding her bleeding lip, Mrs. Hodge still radiating rage, the assembled staff watching with horrified fascination. She attacked me, Mrs. Hodge said immediately. Accused me of theft, tried to undermine my position. She struck me because I exposed her corruption, Elara interrupted, forcing her voice steady despite the pain. And I have proof. 30 pages of documented theft, Your Grace. 400 pounds minimum, possibly more. Adrian looked at Mrs. Hodge. Is this true? Of course not. She's lying, trying to turn you against your own staff. Then you won't mind if I review her evidence. He held out his hand to Elara. The documentation. Elara handed over the ledger, watching Mrs. Hodge's face crumble as Adrian flipped through page after page of carefully recorded discrepancies. The silence stretched like wire pulled taut, ready to snap. Pack your things, Adrian said finally, his voice devoid of emotion. You're dismissed. I want you off this estate by nightfall. Mrs. Hodge swayed as if she might faint. Your Grace, please, I've given my life to this house. You've given 30 years of service and at least 1 year of theft. The only reason I'm not having you arrested is that scandal would hurt the estate more than it would hurt you. He closed the ledger. But if you're not gone by sunset, I will press charges. Do I make myself clear? Mrs. Hodge looked around wildly, seeking support from the assembled staff, but one by one, they looked away. Even her closest allies couldn't defend the indefensible. She fled into the house, her footsteps echoing through the empty halls. Adrian turned to the remaining servants. Anyone else participating in theft or fraud has one chance to confess now. Come forward, and you'll be dismissed without charges. Stay silent and get caught later, and I'll see you prosecuted to the full extent of the law. No one moved. Fine. Mary, you're acting housekeeper until we find a permanent replacement. Report to Miss Whitford for instructions. He looked at Elara, and for the first time she saw something approaching admiration in those storm-gray eyes. My study. Now. Elara followed him inside, her heart pounding. Had she gone too far? Pushed too hard? She'd just gotten the housekeeper dismissed. Would he decide she was more trouble than she was worth? Adrian closed the study door and rounded on her. Let me see your face. She flinched back instinctively, and he froze. I'm not going to hurt you, he said quietly. But that's a nasty split. You'll need it cleaned properly or it'll scar. He poured water from a pitcher, dampened a cloth, and gently tilted her chin up. The tenderness of the gesture was so unexpected that Elara felt tears prick her eyes. That was the bravest and most foolish thing I've ever witnessed, Adrian said as he cleaned the cut. You could have been seriously hurt. Mrs. Hodge has allies who might have done worse than slap you. I know. Elara winced as he pressed the cloth to her lip. But if I'd waited, she would have destroyed evidence, intimidated witnesses, made everything harder to prove. I had to act. By confronting her publicly with half the household watching? By forcing her to react in front of witnesses. Now everyone knows the truth. She can't claim I fabricated evidence or manipulated you. They saw her lose control. They saw her strike me rather than defend herself. That's worth a split lip. Adrian studied her face, not just the injury, but her eyes, reading the determination there. You're either very brave or very stupid. I haven't decided which. Can't I be both? He laughed, genuine and surprised. I suppose you can. He stepped back, giving her space. Mary's a good girl, but completely inexperienced. You'll need to train her, reorganize the household systems, probably deal with resentment from staff who like the old arrangements better. I know. And you'll be doing all of this while the entire estate watches to see if the merchant's daughter can actually manage a duke's household. He paused. Are you sure you want this responsibility? Elara thought of her father, broken and hopeless in his study, of Jamie crying as she left, of the promise she'd made to herself, to survive, to succeed, to return home with her head high. I want to fix what's broken, she said, whether that's accounts or systems or this entire estate. I want to prove that competence matters more than breeding, that intelligence can triumph over corruption. So yes, Your Grace, I want this responsibility. Then it's yours. Adrian held out his hand. Partners in this mess? Elara shook it, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip. Partners. What neither of them noticed was the figure watching from the shadows beyond the study window. A stable hand who'd witnessed everything and was already planning how to turn this development to his advantage. Change was coming to Ravenmoor whether anyone liked it or not, and not everyone was ready to accept the new order without a fight. The stable hand's name was Garrett, and he'd worked at Ravenmoor for 5 years, long enough to know where bodies were buried, both literal and metaphorical. What he'd just witnessed through the study window was a shift in power that threatened everything he'd carefully built. Mrs. Hodge had been predictable, manageable, willing to look the other way when supplies went missing or horses were sold off the books. This Whitford girl was something else entirely. He found Thomas Hargrove in the equipment shed, supposedly repairing fence posts but actually sleeping off last night's ale. Garrett kicked his boot. Wake up! We got a problem! Hargrove jerked upright, bleary-eyed. What now? Mrs. Hodge is finished, dismissed, and that London girl's got the Duke eating out of her hand. Garrett spat into the dirt. She's already looking at the pasture accounts. It's only a matter of time before she finds the discrepancies. The discrepancies in question involved 12 sheep that had supposedly died of disease, but had actually been sold to a buyer in Leeds, with Garrett and Hargrove splitting the profit. Small-scale theft compared to Mrs. Hodge's operations, but enough to get them both hanged if discovered. Hargrove's face went pale. What do we do? We make her disappear before she ruins everything. Garrett's eyes glittered with malice. An accident. City girl wanders too far onto the moors, gets lost in a storm. Happens all the time. You're talking about murder. I'm talking about survival. You want to hang? Because that's where this ends if we don't act. Garrett grabbed Hargrove's collar. She's already destroyed Mrs. Hodge. You think she'll show us any more mercy? Hargrove swallowed hard, fear warring with basic decency. Fear won. What's your plan? 3 days after Mrs. Hodge's dismissal, Elara was running the household with Mary's help and discovering exactly how deep the rot went. Every system had been corrupted, not through grand theft, but through 1,000 small compromises that added up to catastrophic waste. She worked 18-hour days, reorganizing storage, renegotiating with honest suppliers, training Mary to keep proper accounts. Adrian worked alongside her when estate duties permitted, and slowly, grudgingly, the household began to function like it should. But the estate workers were a different problem entirely. Miller had come around after the drainage incident, but his crew remained hostile. They followed orders with sullen resentment, did the minimum required, and watched Elara with the kind of hatred usually reserved for tax collectors and plague rats. They're waiting for you to fail, Mary said one evening as they inventoried linens, betting on how long before you run back to London crying. Let them bet, Elara made a notation in her ledger. I'm not going anywhere. Miss, can I ask you something? Mary hesitated. Why do you care so much? This ain't your home. These ain't your people. You could just keep your head down, do the minimum, leave when your time's up. Elara set down her pen. The honest answer was complicated, a tangle of pride, duty, and something she couldn't quite name. But Mary deserved honesty. My mother died when I was 14, she said quietly. Before she passed, she told me that the world would try to make me small, to convince me that being a woman, being a merchant's daughter, meant accepting less. She said the only way to survive was to be so competent that they couldn't ignore me, so valuable that they couldn't afford to dismiss me. She met Mary's eyes. I'm not doing this for Ravenmoor. I'm doing this because if I fail here, I prove everyone who ever doubted me was right, and I'd rather die than give them that satisfaction." Mary was quiet for a long moment. Then she smiled, small but genuine. "Your mother sounds like she was a hell of a woman." She was, and she deserved better than what the world gave her. Elara returned to her ledger. "So I'm going to be better. For her." That night, Adrian found her in the library. She'd discovered it during her explorations, a magnificent room filled with books no one had touched in years, dust coating everything like snow. She'd been cleaning and cataloging whenever she had spare moments, which wasn't often. "You should be sleeping," Adrian said from the doorway. "So should you." Elara didn't look up from the volume she was examining. "But here we both are." He moved into the room, examining the shelves she'd already organized. "I'd forgotten we even had half these books. My father never read anything that wasn't about hunting or horses." Then he missed out. "There's a complete set of agricultural treatises here, including modern drainage techniques that could solve your pasture problems permanently." She shelved the book she'd been holding. "Also poetry, philosophy, histories. Someone in your family actually cared about learning." "My grandfather. He died when I was young, but I remember him reading to me." Adrian pulled down a volume of Shakespeare, ran his fingers over the worn binding. "Father thought books were a waste of time, said a duke should focus on sport and society, not dusty scholarship." "Your father was wrong." The blunt statement made Adrian laugh. "You don't mince words, do you? Life's too short for polite lies." Elara climbed down from the ladder she'd been using to reach the upper shelves. "Besides, you already know he was wrong. That's why you're here breaking your back trying to fix what he broke, instead of in London pretending the estate runs itself." Adrian set the book down carefully. "Do you ever wonder if we're fools? Fighting for something that might be beyond saving?" "Every day." Elara met his gaze. "But I'd rather be a fool who tried than a coward who gave up." Something shifted in the air between them, a charge like static before a storm. Adrian took a step closer, and Elara's breath caught. She'd been so focused on work, on survival, that she'd barely noticed how the Duke had changed in her presence. The exhaustion was still there, but now it was tempered with something else. Hope, maybe. Or purpose. "Elara," he started. A crash from somewhere below shattered the moment. Both of them froze, then rushed toward the sound. They found Mary in the entrance hall, standing over a shattered vase, her face white with terror. "Someone's in the stables," she gasped. "I saw movement through the window, heard shouting. I think they're trying to take Tempest." Tempest, the black stallion that had arrived 6 months ago, bought at enormous expense to improve Ravenmoor's breeding program, then proven completely unmanageable. He'd put 3 grooms in the infirmary and was currently locked in the most isolated stall, considered too dangerous to handle. Adrian swore and ran for the door. Elara followed, ignoring his shouted order to stay inside. The stable was chaos. Tempest was loose, eyes rolling white with fear and fury, hooves striking out at anything that moved. 2 men Elara didn't recognize were trying to corner him with ropes, while Garrett shouted instructions from a safe distance. "What in the name of all that's holy are you doing?" Adrian roared. The men froze. Tempest used their distraction to wheel around, smashing into a support beam hard enough to make the whole structure shudder. "We were trying to move him, Your Grace," Garrett said quickly. "The stall door was damaged. Thought it would be safer to relocate him before he broke through." "That's a lie," Elara said, her merchant's instincts screaming. "The stall door was inspected yesterday. It was perfectly sound." Garrett's eyes met hers, and in that moment she saw pure hatred. "Maybe you made a mistake in your inspection, miss. You being new to estate work and all. Or maybe you deliberately released a dangerous animal, hoping the chaos would cover whatever else you were planning." She turned to Adrian. "Check the tack room. I'd bet money something's missing." Adrian strode to the tack room, then emerged holding an empty bridle rack. The racing saddle, the one worth more than most of these men make in a year. The 2 strangers bolted. They made it perhaps 10 feet before Miller and his crew appeared, blocking the stable entrance. Apparently word had spread fast. "Thought you might need help, Your Grace," Miller said grimly. "Saw these 2 loading equipment into a cart. Seemed suspicious." Adrian's face went cold as winter stone. "Take them to the equipment shed and lock them in. I'll deal with them after we secure the horse." As Miller's crew dragged the thieves away, Tempest continued to rage, destroying everything within reach. The stallion was magnificent, 17 hands of pure muscle and fury, but completely uncontrollable. "We need to get him back in the stall," Adrian said, "before he hurts himself or brings the whole stable down." "With what? Ropes clearly aren't working." Elara studied the horse, watching the pattern of his movements. He wasn't just angry, he was terrified. Every sudden movement made him flinch. Every raised voice sent him into fresh paroxysms of violence. "Someone abused him," she said quietly. "Before you bought him. That's why he won't let anyone near him. He's not mean. He's traumatized." "That's a nice theory, but it doesn't help us now." Elara walked into the stable. "What are you doing?" Adrian lunged forward, but she was already past him, moving slowly but deliberately toward the raging stallion. "Elara, get out of there! He'll kill you!" She ignored him, focusing entirely on Tempest. The horse saw her, ears pinned back, preparing to charge or kick, or both. "Easy," she said softly, not looking directly at him. Direct eye contact was predatory, threatening. "Easy, beautiful boy. No one's going to hurt you." Tempest stamped, shook his massive head. But he didn't charge. Elara took another step. And another, speaking in a low, continuous murmur, nonsense words really, but the tone was everything. Calm, steady, utterly unafraid. "She's going to get herself killed," Garrett hissed from somewhere behind them. "Shut up," Adrian snapped, his entire body tense with the effort of not intervening. Elara was within 10 feet of the stallion now, close enough to see the scars on his flanks, the healed wounds where someone had used spurs too aggressively, close enough to die if he decided she was a threat. "They hurt you," she whispered, "and now you think everyone will. But you're wrong. Not everyone is cruel. Not everyone wants to break you." She held out her hand, palm up, empty, an offering without demands. Tempest's ears flickered forward, just slightly, just for a moment. Elara waited, breathing slowly, radiating calm she didn't entirely feel. The stallion took one hesitant step toward her, then another. And then his muzzle was touching her palm, breath hot against her skin, dark eyes searching her face for signs of the violence he'd learned to expect from humans. "That's right," Elara murmured. "I'm not going to hurt you. I promise." She ran her hand slowly up his nose, onto his forehead, fingers gentle in his mane. Tempest stood rigid, every muscle coiled, ready to explode at the first wrong move. But Elara made no wrong moves. She just stood there, touching him with infinite patience, letting him learn that not all human contact meant pain. After what felt like an eternity, the stallion's head lowered slightly. Not submission, Tempest would never truly submit, but acceptance. A truce. "Someone bring a lead rope," Elara said quietly. Slowly. Mary appeared, moving like she was approaching a loaded cannon. She handed Elara the rope, then retreated fast. Elara clipped the rope to Tempest's halter with steady hands. "Come on, beautiful, let's get you somewhere safe." She walked slowly back toward the damaged stall, and the stallion followed. Not calmly, his eyes still rolled, his muscles still jumped at every sound, but he followed. When she had him secured, Elara finally allowed herself to breathe. The stable erupted in stunned whispers. Men who'd been working with horses their entire lives stared at her like she'd performed some kind of miracle. Adrian approached carefully. "How did you know that would work?" "I didn't." Elara's hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. "I just knew that what everyone else was doing wasn't working. Sometimes you have to try something completely different, even if it seems insane." That was insane. But there was something like awe in his voice. "That was also the bravest thing I've ever seen. Or the most stupid. We've established I might be both." Adrian laughed, some of the tension draining from his shoulders. Then his expression hardened. "Garrett, my study, now. And someone find Hargrove. He's probably part of whatever this was." Over the next hour, the full extent of the theft ring became clear. Garrett and Hargrove had been systematically stealing from the estate for years, small amounts at first, then growing bolder when no one noticed. The plan had been to release Tempest, use the chaos to steal the valuable racing saddle and other equipment, then claim it was lost in the confusion. Elara's interference had forced them to act prematurely and clumsily. You'll both be prosecuted, Adrian said coldly. I'm done being lenient with thieves. Garrett's hatred finally broke containment. This is all her fault. He pointed at Elara with a shaking hand. Everything was fine until that London whore showed up, acting like she owns the place. Adrian was across the room in 2 strides, his hand around Garrett's throat. Say that word one more time, please. I'm begging you to give me an excuse. Your Grace, Elara touched his arm gently. He's not worth it. Adrian released Garrett with visible effort. Get them out of my sight. Miller, take them to the magistrate in the morning. Press full charges. After the thieves were locked away and the stable secured, Adrian found Elara in the library again. She was trying to read, but the words kept blurring on the page. You're in shock, he said quietly. I'm fine. You're shaking. He was right. Her hands trembled as she tried to turn the page. The full weight of what she'd done, walking toward a violent, terrified animal that could have killed her with one kick, was finally hitting her. Adrian sat beside her, not touching, but close. My mother used to say that bravery isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite it. Then I must be the bravest person in England, because I'm terrified constantly. The admission surprised her. She hadn't meant to say it out loud. Of what? Of failing. Of proving everyone right who said I didn't belong here. Of spending 2 years fighting only to lose everything anyway. She set down the book. Of what happens when this is over and I have to go back to London like none of it mattered. Adrian was quiet for a moment. What if you didn't go back? Elara's heart stuttered. What? What if... He stopped, seemed to be choosing his words carefully. You've accomplished more in 3 weeks than any steward I've had in 3 years. The household runs smoothly, the accounts are clean, the staff actually respects you. Even the men who hated you are starting to come around. He turned to face her. What if this became permanent? Not as a companion or a servant, but as my estate manager. It was the dream she hadn't allowed herself to have. A position of real authority, using her skills, respected for her competence rather than dismissed for her gender. But the offer came with complications she couldn't ignore. The scandal would be enormous, she said quietly. A duke employing a woman as his estate manager? Society would never accept it. Society already thinks the worst of me. I abandoned London, refused to marry appropriately, run my own estate like a common farmer. One more scandal won't make much difference. It would make a difference to your ability to negotiate favorable terms with suppliers, arrange marriages for your heirs, maintain connections that protect this estate politically. Elara shook her head. I appreciate the offer, but you need to think beyond what makes sense practically and consider what's viable politically. To hell with politics. You don't mean that. If you did, you wouldn't be fighting so hard to save Ravenmore. You'd sell it to the first buyer and live comfortably in London on the proceeds. She stood, needing distance. We both know the situation is temporary. 2 years. Then I go home and you find someone society can accept in the position. And if I don't want that? The question hung between them, heavy with implications neither was ready to address. Before Elara could respond, Mary burst into the library. Miss, Your Grace, riders coming up the main road. A lot of them. They rushed to the entrance hall windows. In the dying light, Elara counted at least 6 horses, possibly more. The lead rider carried a banner that snapped in the wind, blue and silver, emblazoned with a falcon. Adrian went absolutely still. No, it can't be. What? Who is it? Lady Cassandra Vale. His voice was hollow. My betrothed. The word hit Elara like a physical blow. Betrothed. Of course. He was a duke. Did she really think someone like that would remain unmarried without good reason? But knowing it intellectually and hearing it confirmed were 2 entirely different things. I didn't know you were engaged, she managed. It's not official. Our families have an understanding, an arrangement made when we were children. I've been putting it off for years, but clearly she's decided to force the issue. Adrian dragged a hand through his hair. This is a disaster. The riders clattered into the courtyard. Servants scrambled to attend to them. More servants than Elara had seen in her entire time at Ravenmore, apparently summoned by news of important visitors. The woman who dismounted from the lead horse was everything Elara wasn't. tall and willowy, with blonde hair elaborately styled despite hours of travel. Her riding habit probably cost more than Elara's father made in a year. She moved with the absolute confidence of someone who'd never been told no in her entire life. "Adrian!" Her voice carried across the courtyard like a bell. "Darling, why didn't you tell me you were hiding away in this charming rustic retreat? I absolutely had to come see for myself." She swept up the steps and into the entrance hall like she owned it, her entourage following. Her eyes swept over the space, cataloging, judging, finding it wanting. Then her gaze landed on Elara, and those perfectly painted lips curved into something that might have been a smile on anyone else but was pure calculation on Cassandra. "And who is this?" she asked sweetly. "Adrian, you didn't mention you'd acquired new staff. How quaint." The casual dismissal, reducing Elara to mere staff without even a name, was expertly done. Cassandra hadn't survived London society without learning how to draw blood with a smile. "Lady Cassandra Vale," Adrian said tightly, "may I present Miss Elara Whitford? She's managing the estate accounts." How industrious. Cassandra's eyes never left Elara's face, reading every detail. The split lip that was still healing, the plain dress, the ink stains on her fingers. "I'm sure you're terribly efficient. Adrian does appreciate efficiency in his employees." The pause before employees was deliberate, loaded with implications. Elara curtsied, keeping her face neutral. "Welcome to Ravenmoor, my lady." "Oh, how formal. But I suppose when one is in service, one must maintain proper decorum." Cassandra turned back to Adrian, dismissing Elara as thoroughly as if she'd vanished. "Darling, we have so much to discuss. Mother sent me with the most delightful news about the wedding arrangements. She's secured Westminster Abbey for June. Can you imagine? Westminster. It's going to be the event of the season." Adrian's jaw tightened. "Cassandra, we need to talk, privately." "Of course, I'm positively dying to see the rest of this fascinating estate. Why don't you show me to my rooms and we can chat while I refresh myself from the journey?" She linked her arm through Adrian's with practiced ease, already walking toward the stairs. Adrian glanced back at Elara, and the apology in his eyes was clear. But he went with Cassandra anyway, because what else could he do? Elara stood in the entrance hall, watching them disappear up the stairs, and felt something crack inside her chest. This was always how it was going to end. She'd known that. A merchant's daughter didn't get fairy tale endings with dukes, no matter how many estates she saved or horses she tamed. She was here to do a job, earn her family's freedom, and leave. Nothing more. So why did it hurt so much? "Miss?" Mary touched her arm gently. "You all right?" "Fine." Elara straightened her shoulders. "We have guests. Make sure the East Wing rooms are prepared. Lady Cassandra will expect luxury even if the rest of the house is Spartan, and arrange for a formal dinner. If we're hosting future Duchess of Ravenmoor, we should do it properly." She threw herself into preparations, using work to numb the ache. By evening, the East Wing gleamed, fires burned in every room, and a feast worthy of London society graced the dining table. Elara dressed in her best gown, which was still woefully inadequate compared to what Cassandra would wear, and took her assigned seat at the dinner table. Not beside Adrian this time. That place of honor belonged to Cassandra. Elara was relegated to the far end, between two of Cassandra's companions, whose names she immediately forgot. Cassandra held court brilliantly, entertaining everyone with stories of London scandals and society gossip. She was charming, witty, beautiful, everything a duke's wife should be, and she barely acknowledged Elara's existence. It wasn't until dessert that Cassandra deigned to address her directly. "Miss Whitford, Adrian tells me you've been quite helpful with the accounts. How wonderful that you have such practical skills. I imagine that's quite necessary for someone in your position." "I do what's needed," Elara said evenly. "How admirable. Though I must say, I don't quite understand why Adrian would need help with accounts. Surely that's what stewards are for." She smiled sweetly at Adrian. "Darling, once we're married, I'll send our London steward up here to sort everything out. Then you won't have to burden yourself with such tedious matters, or burden others with them." "The accounts are well in hand," Adrian said carefully. "Miss Whitford has proven exceptionally capable. I'm sure she has. But really, Adrian, you can't expect a woman, even a very clever one, to truly understand the complexities of managing an estate of this size. It's why we have professionals. Cassandra's smile never wavered. No offense intended, of course, Miss Whitford. None taken, my lady. Elara kept her voice pleasant. Though I should note that the estate's income has increased 17% since I began managing the accounts, primarily through eliminating waste and fraud. How impressive! Cassandra's eyes glittered like ice. Though I do hope you're not suggesting that Adrian's previous staff were dishonest. That would reflect rather poorly on his judgment, wouldn't it? It was a neat trap. Agree. And Elara insulted Adrian. Disagree, and she backed down from her own accomplishments. I'm suggesting that complex systems sometimes develop inefficiencies, Elara said carefully, regardless of who's managing them. Fresh eyes often spot problems that become invisible to those too close to the situation. Well reasoned, one of Cassandra's companions murmured, a gentleman Elara vaguely recognized from London society. Cassandra's smile turned brittle. How fortunate that Adrian found someone so eager to help. Tell me, Miss Whitford, what exactly are the terms of your employment? I'd like to ensure we maintain proper standards once Adrian and I are settled here. The question was poisoned. Any answer would sound defensive or inappropriate. Adrian intervened. Miss Whitford is here temporarily, managing a specific project. Her father and I have a business arrangement that will conclude within 2 years. A business arrangement? Cassandra's tone made it sound sordid. How very modern, and what happens after these 2 years? That's not yet decided, Adrian said firmly. Now, if we could discuss something other than household management, of course. I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to bore everyone with domestic trivialities. Cassandra launched into a story about a scandal at the last ball she'd attended, and Elara was once again rendered invisible. After dinner, Elara retreated to her room. She told herself it was better this way. Cassandra's arrival was a reminder of reality, of the insurmountable gulf between merchants' daughters and dukes, between temporary arrangements and permanent futures. She was preparing for bed when she heard shouting from below. Adrian and Cassandra, voices rising and falling in heated argument. She couldn't make out words, but the fury was unmistakable. Then footsteps in the hallway. A knock at her door. Elara! Adrian's voice rough with frustration. We need to talk. She opened the door, acutely aware that she was in her nightgown, and this was wildly inappropriate. It's late, Your Grace. I don't care about propriety right now. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. I need you to know that what Cassandra said tonight, the way she treated you, that's not acceptable. She's entitled to her opinions. She's entitled to basic decency, which she failed to demonstrate. Adrian paced the small room like a caged animal. I'm ending the engagement. I'm telling her tomorrow. Elara's heart leapt, then plummeted just as fast. You can't do that. Why not? Because she's right. You need a wife who understands society, who can navigate politics, who brings connections and wealth. Elara forced the words out. Everything I'm not and can never be. I don't want connections and wealth. I want someone who understands this estate, who cares about making it work, who... He stopped, running his hands through his hair. I want someone who walks into a stable with a violent horse because it's the right thing to do, even if it's insane. Adrian, I'm in love with you. The words came out fierce and desperate. I've been fighting it for weeks, telling myself it was impossible, that you were here temporarily and I had obligations. But watching Cassandra tonight, seeing how she looked at you, at this place, I can't do it, Elara. I can't marry someone who sees Ravenmoor as an inconvenient rural property to be managed from London while we enjoy society. Elara's breath caught. Everything she wanted and everything she feared offered simultaneously. If you break that engagement, the scandal will destroy you. The Vale family is powerful. They'll make sure you're ostracized, that Ravenmoor's business relationships suffer, that every door in London closes. Then let them close. I don't need London. You need the connections to survive. The loans, the business arrangements, the political protection, all of that depends on maintaining relationships with families like the Vales. She grabbed his hands, forcing him to look at her. I won't let you destroy everything you've built for me. I won't be the reason Ravenmoor fails. You're the reason it's succeeding. for now. But what about in 5 years? 10? When the novelty of the merchant's daughter wears off and you're left with nothing but closed doors and failed opportunities? Elara pulled away. I care about you too much to let you make that mistake. Adrian stared at her. You care about me. Of course I do. How could I not? The admission hurt. But caring isn't enough, not in the real world where breeding and titles matter more than competence or feelings. Then the real world is wrong. Maybe, but we still have to live in it. Elara wrapped her arms around herself. Marry Cassandra, produce heirs, save Ravenmore the right way, through alliances and advantageous connections. And in 2 years, I'll leave, and you'll forget about the merchant's daughter who was briefly useful. I could never forget you. You'd be surprised what people can forget when survival depends on it. Adrian looked like he wanted to argue further, but footsteps in the hallway made them both freeze. Cassandra's voice calling for her maid. You need to go, Elara whispered, before someone sees you here and makes this disaster even worse. Adrian left without another word, but the anguish in his eyes haunted Elara long after she heard his door close down the hall. She didn't sleep. Instead, she sat by the window, watching storm clouds gather over the moors, and made a decision. Tomorrow, she would ask Adrian to release her from their arrangement early. She'd return to London, find other work, let her father face reduced circumstances, but at least maintain their dignity. Staying here would only make everything harder, for Adrian, for herself, for everyone trying to survive in a world that didn't forgive boundary crossings between classes. It was the right choice, the practical choice. So why did it feel like she was tearing out her own heart? The storm broke just before dawn, violent and sudden, the kind that turned the moors deadly. Lightning split the sky. Thunder shook the windows. And somewhere in the chaos, Elara heard a sound that made her blood run cold. Hoofbeats and screaming. She ran to the window and saw Tempest in the courtyard, loose again, completely mad with terror from the storm. And in the middle of the chaos, trying desperately to calm him, was Cassandra. Elara didn't think. She ran. Down the stairs, through the entrance hall, bursting into the courtyard in nothing but her nightgown and bare feet. Rain lashed her face instantly, cold as knives. Lightning illuminated the scene in stark flashes, Tempest rearing, eyes rolling white with terror, and Cassandra frozen in the center of the courtyard, her elaborate nightdress already soaked through. Don't move! Elara shouted over the thunder. Cassandra's head whipped toward her, and even through the rain, Elara could see the stark terror on her face. The perfect society lady was gone, replaced by a woman who just realized she might die. He's going to kill me, Cassandra said, voice breaking. I heard noise, thought someone was stealing horses, came down to investigate. Another lightning strike. Tempest screamed and lunged sideways, hooves striking out. Cassandra stumbled backward, slipped in the mud, went down hard. The stallion wheeled toward her, a half-ton of panicked muscle and rage. In seconds, Cassandra would be trampled. Elara moved without conscious thought, putting herself between the woman and the horse. She spread her arms wide, making herself as large as possible, and met Tempest's wild eyes. Stop! The word came out with every ounce of authority she possessed. Tempest, stop! The stallion checked his charge at the last possible second, hooves churning mud inches from Elara's bare feet. His breath came in great gasping whinnies, flanks heaving. Easy, beautiful boy, Elara said, gentling her voice despite her hammering heart. It's just a storm, just noise. You're safe. She took a step toward him. Rain ran down her face, plastered her hair to her skull. Behind her, she could hear Cassandra sobbing in the mud, but she couldn't afford to look away from Tempest. That's right, I'm here. I won't let anything hurt you. Another step. Her foot landed on something sharp, broken glass or stone, and pain lanced through her heel. She ignored it, focused entirely on the terrified animal in front of her. Tempest's ears flickered forward, that same tentative gesture she'd seen before when he'd decided to trust her the first time. Good boy, Elara murmured. Such a good, brave boy. She reached out slowly, every muscle screaming at her to move faster, to get this over with. But rushing would undo everything, so she moved at a glacier's pace, hand extended, until finally her fingers touched wet hide. Tempest shuddered, but didn't bolt. Elara ran her hand up his neck, found the halter that was still attached. Someone had been criminally negligent, leaving it on, and gripped it firmly. "Come on," she said. "Let's get you somewhere dry and quiet." She led him toward the stable, moving slowly through the mud. Behind her, she heard voices, Adrian's, sharp with fear, then softer as he helped Cassandra to her feet. But Elara didn't look back. All that mattered was getting Tempest safe before another lightning strike sent him into fresh panic. The stable was blessedly calm, oil lamps casting warm circles of light. Elara guided Tempest into his stall, removed the halter with steady hands, and only then allowed herself to acknowledge the burning pain in her foot and the violent shaking that had nothing to do with cold. "Elara." She turned to find Adrian in the stable entrance, supporting Cassandra, who looked like she'd been dragged through hell backwards. Behind them, half the household had gathered, drawn by the commotion. "Is she hurt?" Elara asked, moving toward them. "Bruised and terrified, but alive. Thanks to you." Adrian's eyes swept over her, soaked nightgown, muddy bare feet, bleeding heel. "You're injured." "It's nothing. You stepped between a panicked horse and certain death in bare feet during a lightning storm." His voice was rough. "That's not nothing." Cassandra was staring at Elara with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not gratitude exactly, something more complicated. "You saved my life," Cassandra said quietly. When he charged, I thought I was dead. And you just walked toward him, like it was nothing." It wasn't nothing. It was stupid and reckless. Elara's legs chose that moment to give out. She sat down hard on a hay bale, the adrenaline finally crashing. "But I couldn't let him hurt you." "Why not?" The question was sharp, almost angry. "I've been nothing but cruel to you since I arrived. I've dismissed you, insulted you, treated you like you were worthless. Why would you risk your life for me?" Elara met her eyes. "Because whether I like you or not, you didn't deserve to die. And because Tempest didn't deserve to have another person's death on his conscience. He's not a monster. He's traumatized. There's a difference." Silence fell in the stable, broken only by the storm raging outside and Tempest's gradually calming breaths. Then Cassandra did something extraordinary. She walked over to Elara, sank down onto the hay bale beside her, and started to cry. Not delicate society tears, real, ugly, terrified sobbing. "I could have died," she gasped between sobs. "I could have died, and the last thing I would have done was be cruel to the woman who saved me. What kind of person does that make me?" Elara had no idea how to respond to this. She settled for awkward silence while Cassandra wept. Finally, Adrian stepped forward. "Cassandra, you should get inside, get warm, let someone tend to those bruises." "No." Cassandra wiped her eyes, smearing mud across her cheeks. "No, I need to say this now before I lose my nerve. Adrian, we can't get married." Adrian froze. "What?" "We can't. It would be a disaster." Cassandra looked at him with something approaching pity. "You don't love me. You've never loved me. And I don't love you. We've just been playing roles our families assigned us because neither of us had the courage to say no." "Cassandra, let me finish." She stood, wrapping her arms around herself. "I came here to force the marriage because Mother insisted, because it was expected, because I was afraid of what would happen if I refused. But watching you these past days, seeing this place, meeting," she glanced at Elara, "meeting people who actually care about something beyond social position, I realized I don't want this life. I don't want to be trapped in a crumbling estate, pretending to care about drainage systems and sheep. And you don't want to be trapped with someone who sees all of this as a burden to be managed." "Then what do you want?" Adrian asked quietly. "I want to go back to London. I want to marry Lord Pemberton. Yes, I know about him. I've known for months. He's kind and funny, and he actually enjoys society, which means we can build a life together that makes sense for both of us." She managed a watery smile. "And you want to stay here and save Ravenmore with someone who understands why it matters." Her eyes moved deliberately to Elara. The implication hung in the air like smoke. "I can't," Elara said, finding her voice. "The scandal will happen regardless," Cassandra interrupted. "If Adrian and I break this engagement, London will talk regardless of the reason. So we might as well give them something interesting to gossip about. She turned back to Adrian. Tell them I ended it. Tell them I'm marrying Pemberton instead. Let me be the scandalous one. I have the breeding and connections to survive it. You don't need London's approval, but I do, so let me control the narrative. Adrian looked stunned. You'd do that? Take the social consequences? Consider it repayment for saving my life, and for making me realize I was about to make a catastrophic mistake. Cassandra managed a real smile. Besides, Pemberton's mother adores me. Between her influence and the right story, something about realizing we wanted different lives, very amicable, mutual decision, I'll weather the storm. Your mother will be furious, Adrian said. My mother has been furious about something or other since I was born. I'll manage her. Cassandra stood, wobbling slightly. Now, I really should get inside before I catch pneumonia and make this even more dramatic than necessary. She swept toward the stable entrance, then paused. Miss Whitford, thank you, for my life and for showing me what actual courage looks like. Then she was gone, leaving Elara and Adrian alone in the lamplit stable with the storm raging outside. Did that really just happen? Elara asked faintly. I think so. Adrian sat down beside her on the hay bale, though I'm not entirely convinced this isn't a fever dream brought on by stress and terror. If it is, we're having the same one. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Adrian said, You're still bleeding. Elara looked down at her foot, blood mixed with mud, making it look worse than it probably was. I should clean it. Let me. He fetched a clean cloth and water from the stable's wash bucket, then knelt in front of her. His hands were gentle as he cleaned the wound, a deep cut from broken glass, but not serious. You could have died tonight, he said quietly, not looking up from his work. Tempest could have trampled you. The lightning could have struck you. A dozen different things could have gone catastrophically wrong. But they didn't. This time. What about the next time you decide to do something impossibly brave and reckless? He finally met her eyes. What happens when your luck runs out? Then I suppose I'll have died doing something worthwhile. Elara touched his cheek. Adrian, I can't promise to be careful. I can't promise to always make the safe choice. If I'd been careful tonight, Cassandra would be dead and Tempest would have had to be destroyed. Sometimes the reckless choice is the only right one. I know. It's one of the things I love about you. He wrapped the cloth around her foot with practiced efficiency. It's also the thing that's going to give me gray hair before I'm 40. The casual use of love made Elara's breath catch. Adrian, don't tell me all the reasons we can't work again. I've heard them. I've even agreed with most of them. He stood, pulling her to her feet carefully. But Cassandra's right. The scandal's coming regardless. So we can either hide from it and spend the rest of our lives wondering what might have been, or we can face it together and build something worth fighting for. The estate will suffer. Your business relationships, your political connections, will adapt or be replaced. Elara, I've spent 6 months trying to save Ravenmoor the traditional way, hiring stewards who stole from me, maintaining appearances while everything crumbled, playing by rules that were designed to keep people like you away from power. He took her hands. In 3 weeks, you've accomplished more than all of them combined, not despite being an outsider, but because of it. You saw the problems they were blind to. You made decisions they were too afraid to make. You walked toward danger they would have run from. Because I had nothing to lose. They had positions, reputations, and you had a family depending on you, a debt hanging over your head, and every reason to keep your head down and survive the 2 years quietly. Adrian's grip tightened. But you didn't. You fought. You fixed things. You made enemies and allies and saved lives. That's not nothing, Elara. That's everything. Thunder crashed overhead, making them both flinch. Tempest stirred in his stall but didn't panic. His breathing was already evening out, the storm's fury fading to background noise. If I stay, Elara said slowly, if we do this, it has to be on equal terms, not as your employee or your obligation, as your partner. Done. I mean it. Equal say in estate decisions, equal access to accounts, equal authority over household management. Not because you're being generous, but because that's what I'm worth. I know what you're worth. The question is whether you do. Elara thought about the past 3 weeks. The battles fought, the systems rebuilt, The moment she'd stood in front of a violent horse and demanded it trust her, she thought about her mother's voice saying the world would try to make her small, and her own fierce refusal to accept that diminishment. "I'm worth exactly what I can accomplish," she said. "No more, no less. And I can accomplish extraordinary things if given the chance." "Then take the chance, stay, not for 2 years, but permanently. As my estate manager, my partner, my—" He stopped, seemed to be gathering courage. "My wife, if you'll have me." The word hung between them, terrifying and perfect. "That's insane," Elara whispered. "I know. Society will never accept it. I know. Your mother will probably disown you. Actually, I think she'll surprise you. But even if she doesn't, I know." Elara laughed, a slightly hysterical sound. "We're going to fail spectacularly at this, aren't we?" "Probably. But we'll fail together, which is better than succeeding alone." Adrian pulled her closer. "Marry me, Elara Whitford. Not because of debt or obligation or scandal management. Marry me because you want to build something worth defending. Marry me because when you look at these moors, you see potential instead of desolation. Marry me because—" She kissed him. It wasn't gentle or romantic. It was fierce and desperate, and tasted like rain and mud and terror survived. It was a promise and a declaration and a decision all at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Elara said, "Yes, but I'm not changing my name." Adrian laughed, bright and genuine. "I wouldn't expect you to." They stood there in the lamplight, soaked and muddy and bleeding, making plans that would scandalize everyone who heard them. Equal partnership, shared authority. A merchant's daughter as the Duchess of Ravenmore, managing the estate alongside her husband instead of decorating his drawing rooms. It was insane. It was impossible. It was exactly right. The storm broke just before dawn, leaving the moors washed clean and gleaming. Elara stood at her window, watching the sun rise over land she was choosing to make her own. Not through marriage alone, but through work, through competence, through sheer stubborn refusal to accept limitations others tried to impose. A knock at her door. Mary entered carrying a tray with breakfast and an envelope. "This just arrived by express rider, miss, from London." Elara's hands shook as she opened it, her father's handwriting, familiar and beloved. "Dearest Elara, I have received extraordinary news via the Duke of Ravenmore's solicitor. The debt has been marked as fully satisfied, effective immediately. Furthermore, His Grace has extended an offer to purchase a share in my shipping business, providing capital for expansion and naming you as his representative in all negotiations. I do not know what you have done to earn such favor, but I trust it was accomplished with the intelligence and integrity your mother would have been proud of. Come home when you're ready, or stay if you found purpose there. You owe us nothing more. We are free. Your loving father, Thomas Whitford." Elara read the letter twice, then a third time. Adrian had released her from obligation before she'd even agreed to marry him. Given her freedom, made sure her family was provided for, then asked her to choose him anyway. "Miss?" Mary was watching her with concern. "Is everything all right?" "Yes." Elara smiled through tears she didn't bother to hide. "Everything is exactly as it should be." Over the next week, news of the broken engagement spread through the county like wildfire. Cassandra had returned to London and, true to her word, crafted a narrative that painted the dissolution as mutual and amicable. She was, according to the letters that reached Ravenmore, already being courted openly by Lord Pemberton, and society was too busy gossiping about that scandal to focus heavily on Adrian's role. But the real surprise came on a gray Tuesday morning when a carriage bearing the Blackthorne family crest rolled into the courtyard. From it emerged a woman who could only be Adrian's mother, tall, severe, with storm-gray eyes identical to her son's. The Dowager Duchess of Ravenmore surveyed the estate with the practiced eye of someone who'd once managed it herself. Then her gaze landed on Elara, who stood on the front steps in a practical work dress, ledger tucked under one arm. "So," the Dowager said, "you're the merchant's daughter who conquered my son's heart and saved him from a disastrous marriage." Elara curtsied, refusing to be intimidated. "Your Grace, I'm Elara Whitford, estate manager." "Estate manager," the Dowager's lips twitched. "How delightfully modern. And what exactly does an estate manager do that a traditional steward does not? Whatever is necessary to keep the estate functioning. This morning that involved negotiating wool prices with buyers from Leeds, resolving a dispute over water rights with the neighboring property, and preventing the cook from serving mutton that was 2 days past fresh. Elara met her eyes steadily. Tomorrow, it might involve something entirely different. The role adapts to the need. I see. The dowager climbed the steps until she stood directly in front of Elara. My son sent word that he intends to marry you, that he's ending a centuries-old alliance with the Vale family to wed someone with no title, no connections, and no training in how to be a duchess. He expects me to accept this. Actually, Elara said carefully, I don't think he expects anything. I think he hopes you'll understand, but he's prepared to proceed regardless of your approval. The dowager studied her for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled. Good. If he'd presented you as a fait accompli, expecting my blessing, I would have had serious concerns about his judgment. But admitting he's prepared to weather my disapproval while hoping for my understanding, that shows maturity. She swept into the house, leaving Elara to follow in confusion. Adrian met them in the entrance hall. Mother, I wasn't expecting you for another week. I came early to assess the situation before you did something irreversibly stupid. The dowager looked around the hall, clean, organized, efficiently managed. Though I see Miss Whitford has been keeping you from complete disaster. She's been keeping me from any number of disasters. That's why I'm marrying her. I'd like to speak with her privately. You, go manage something, preferably far away from here. Adrian glanced at Elara, who nodded slightly. He left, throwing one last concerned look over his shoulder. The dowager led Elara to the library, the one room Elara had fully restored to its former glory. She ran her fingers over the carefully organized shelves, the polished desk, the windows that actually let in light. This was my favorite room, she said quietly. When I first married Adrian's father, I spent every spare moment here, reading, learning, trying to understand how to manage an estate I had no training for. She turned to face Elara. His father forbade me from involving myself in business matters, said it wasn't appropriate for a duchess. So I watched him drive this place into the ground while I hosted dinner parties and pretended everything was fine. I'm sorry, Elara said, meaning it. Don't be sorry, be better. The dowager's eyes were fierce. Adrian tells me you've increased estate income, rooted out corruption, reorganized systems that had been failing for years. In 3 weeks. 3 weeks, Miss Whitford, when my husband couldn't accomplish the same in 30 years. I had advantages your husband didn't. Fresh perspective, practical training. You had courage he lacked. The courage to challenge assumptions, to fire people who needed firing, to do the work instead of delegating it to incompetence. She moved closer. Tell me honestly, do you love my son, or do you see him as an opportunity? Elara met her gaze without flinching. I love him, but I'd be lying if I said the opportunity to do meaningful work, to use my skills, to build something lasting, that those things aren't part of why I'm staying. I won't pretend this is a fairy tale romance where nothing else matters. It's a partnership built on mutual respect, shared goals, and yes, love. All of those things matter. Good. The dowager smiled, genuine warmth breaking through her stern exterior. Fairy tale romances make terrible marriages. Partnerships built on respect and shared purpose? Those endure. She paused. The scandal will be significant. Society will mock you, exclude you, question your every decision. Adrian's standing will suffer, at least initially. Are you prepared for that? I spent 3 weeks being treated like a whore by people who resented my presence. I survived that. I can survive London gossip. It won't just be gossip. There will be real consequences. Business opportunities lost because families refused to associate with a duke who married so far beneath his station. Doors closed, friendships ended. The dowager's voice was gentle but unflinching. I need to know you won't break under that pressure. Because if you break, Adrian breaks with you. Elara thought about her mother dying slowly, watching the life drain from her while doctors shook their heads helplessly. She thought about her father's business collapsing despite his best efforts, about Jamie's tears, about every moment of the past 3 weeks, when she'd wanted to run but chose to stay. "I don't break," she said quietly. "I might bend. I might struggle. But I don't break. And neither does Adrian. That's why this will work. Because we're both too stubborn to accept defeat." The Dowager laughed, bright and unexpected. "My dear girl, I think you might be exactly what this family needs. Welcome to the Blackthorn legacy. Try not to let us destroy you." She pulled Elara into an embrace that was brief but genuine. When she stepped back, her eyes were suspiciously bright. "Now then," she said briskly, "let's discuss wedding arrangements. If we're going to scandalize society, we should at least do it with style." The wedding was planned for spring, giving Cassandra time to firmly establish her relationship with Pemberton and giving Ravenmore time to prepare for the influx of guests, because despite the scandal, the Dowager Duchess had made it clear this would be a proper celebration, attended by anyone who wanted to maintain her good graces. But before any of that, there was still work to do. Elara threw herself into estate management with renewed purpose. She hired new staff carefully, choosing competence over connections. She reorganized the tenant agreements to be fairer while still maintaining profitability. She even convinced Adrian to invest in modern farming equipment that would increase yields over time. And she worked with Tempest. Every morning she spent an hour in his stall just talking to him, letting him learn that humans could be gentle. Slowly, painfully slowly, the stallion began to trust. First accepting treats from her hand, then allowing her to brush him, finally letting her place a saddle on his back. The day she rode him for the first time, half the estate turned out to watch. Miller and his crew, Mary and the household staff, even Adrian stood at the fence watching as Elara led Tempest into the training ring. "This is insane," Miller muttered. "That horse is a killer." "That horse is traumatized," Elara corrected. She swung into the saddle, feeling Tempest tense beneath her. "Easy, beautiful boy. We're going to do this together." She didn't force him, didn't demand, just sat there, letting him feel her weight, her presence, her utter lack of fear or aggression. After what felt like an eternity, Tempest took one tentative step forward, then another. Within minutes, they were walking the ring. Within an hour, they were trotting. And by the end of the afternoon, Elara was flying across the pasture on a horse everyone had written off as unmanageable, proving once again that with patience, understanding, and sheer stubborn determination, anything was possible. When she returned to the stable, Adrian was waiting with something approaching awe on his face. "I've never seen anything like that," he said. "It's not magic. It's just refusing to give up on something worth saving." Elara dismounted, ran her hand along Tempest's neck one more time. "Just like this estate. Just like us." "Just like you," Adrian corrected. He pulled her close, not caring who was watching. "You're the one who refuses to give up. On horses, on estates, on people who probably don't deserve your faith." "You deserve it," Elara said firmly. "You've been fighting alone for so long, you forgot what it's like to have someone in your corner. But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." That night, they sat together in the library, their library now, filled with books they both loved and plans they were building together. Elara had spread the estate maps across the desk, marking areas for improvement, expansion, innovation. "We could divert water from the northern stream to irrigate the lower fields," she said, tracing potential channels with her finger. "Triple our crop yield in 2 years. It would require significant investment up front," Adrian noted, "which we can afford now that we're not bleeding money through corruption, and your mother's connections can help us secure favorable loans." Elara looked up at him. "This could work, Adrian. Not just survive, but truly thrive. We could make Ravenmore a model for modern estate management. We could make a lot of enemies among traditionalists who think change is heresy. Let them talk. We'll be too busy succeeding to care." She smiled. "Besides, you said it yourself. We're already the scandal. Might as well earn the reputation." Adrian laughed and pulled her into his arms. Outside, the moors stretched endlessly under a clear night sky. Inside, two people who shouldn't have worked together were building something extraordinary. The merchant's daughter, who'd arrived as payment for debt, had become the woman who would reshape an estate, challenge a society, and prove that competence mattered more than breeding. And she was just getting started. Spring arrived with a vengeance, turning the moors from gray desolation into an ocean of purple heather and wild grass. It was the kind of transformation that reminded Elara why people fought to survive in places like this. Beneath the harshness lived extraordinary beauty, waiting for those patient enough to witness it. The wedding was 3 weeks away, and Ravenmore had transformed alongside the landscape. New staff worked efficiently under Mary's supervision. The accounts showed consistent profit for the first time in years. Even the most skeptical tenant farmers were beginning to admit that maybe, just maybe, the merchant's daughter knew what she was doing. But success breeds resentment in those who profit from failure, and not everyone at Ravenmore had accepted the new order. The trouble started on a Tuesday morning when Elara discovered discrepancies in the wool sales records. Not large amounts, just enough to be dismissed as accounting errors if she weren't looking carefully. But Elara always looked carefully. "These numbers don't match the shipping manifests," she said, spreading the documents across the desk in Adrian's study. "We're showing payment for 800 pounds of wool, but the manifests only account for 750. Adrian frowned, examining the papers. "Could be a clerical error. Miller's been managing the wool sales." "Miller's been managing them honestly since Garrett was arrested. These discrepancies started appearing 2 weeks ago, after we hired Thomas Crane to handle transportation." Elara tapped the manifest with her pen. "I need to talk to Crane. Where is he today?" "Should be at the wool storage barn preparing the next shipment to Leeds." Elara stood, gathering the documents. "Then that's where I'm going." "Wait." Adrian caught her arm. "If you're right, if Crane is stealing, confronting him alone could be dangerous. Let me come with you." "You have the meeting with the Water Rights Commission in an hour. That's more important. If we lose access to the northern stream, all our irrigation plans collapse." She kissed him quickly. "I'll bring Miller with me. If there's a problem, he'll handle it." She found Miller repairing fence posts in the eastern pasture. His reaction to her request was immediate suspicion. "You think Crane's stealing?" "I think the numbers don't add up, and I need to verify inventory before making accusations." Elara showed him the documents. "If I'm wrong, no harm done. If I'm right, we stop it before the losses get worse." Miller studied the papers, his weathered face creasing with concern. "Crane came recommended by the Vale family. Before Lady Cassandra left, she suggested we hire him for transportation, said he was reliable and honest." Warning bells clanged in Elara's mind. Cassandra had been genuine in her support since the broken engagement, corresponding regularly with encouraging letters. But that didn't mean everyone in her family had accepted the situation gracefully. What if Crane wasn't just a thief? What if he was sabotage, a deliberate plant to undermine the estate's recovery? "All the more reason to verify," Elara said. "Are you coming?" The wool storage barn sat at the edge of the estate, a massive stone structure that smelled of lanolin and hay. Inside, bales of wool were stacked precisely, organized by quality and weight. It should have been simple to count and verify, but when they entered, they found Thomas Crane loading a cart with twice the amount of wool the manifest listed for today's shipment. "Mr. Crane," Elara called, "could you explain why you're loading 16 bales when the manifest only authorizes 8? Crane froze, then slowly turned. He was a large man, thick through the shoulders, with the kind of face that could shift from friendly to threatening in a heartbeat. Right now, it was definitely shifting toward threatening. "Just preparing for tomorrow's shipment as well," he said. "Saves a trip. Tomorrow's shipment goes to a different buyer, different warehouse. There's no efficiency in combining them." Elara moved closer, Miller at her side. "I think you're planning to sell the extra 8 bales privately and pocket the profit." "That's theft, Mr. Crane." Crane's expression hardened. "That's a serious accusation from a woman who's only been here a few months. Maybe you've made a mistake in your fancy accounting." "I don't make mistakes with numbers, and I'm not the one loading unauthorized wool onto a cart." She held up the manifest. "We can do this easily. You can unload the extra bales, we'll do a complete inventory, and if everything matches, you keep your job, or we can do this the hard way." "The hard way, is it?" Crane took a step toward her, and Elara suddenly realized how isolated they were. The barn was a 10-minute walk from the main house. No one would hear if she called for help. Miller moved between them. "Back off, Crane. You're already in enough trouble without adding assault to theft." "Assault?" Crane laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I'm just having a conversation. Though I'll admit, I'm curious what gives a merchant's whore the right to throw around accusations like she owns the place." The word hit like a slap, just as it was meant to. Elara forced herself to remain calm. I have the right because I'm the estate manager, appointed by the Duke himself. And you're fired. Leave the property by nightfall, or I'll have you arrested for theft. Crane's hand moved to his belt, where Elara now noticed a knife sheathed. See, that's the problem with you London girls. You think you can waltz into places you don't belong and start giving orders. Someone should teach you some manners. Miller's stance shifted, preparing for violence. Touch her, and you'll regret it. Will I? Old man like you against someone half your age. Crane drew the knife, and the situation went from tense to deadly in a heartbeat. I think I'll teach her a lesson, then take what I'm owed from this barn. And if you're smart, you'll walk away and forget you saw anything. Elara's mind raced. Miller was tough, but Crane was bigger, younger, armed. Even if they fought and won, someone would get hurt. She needed to change the dynamic, shift the power. You're right, she said suddenly. I don't belong here. A merchant's daughter managing a duke's estate? It's absurd, unnatural. Crane's eyes narrowed suspiciously. Miller shot her a confused look. But you know what's even more absurd? Elara continued, her voice strengthening. The fact that this estate was failing with men like you running it. That it took someone unnatural to root out the corruption, fix the systems, and actually make things work. You can call me whatever names make you feel powerful, Mr. Crane. But at the end of this day, I'm standing here with legal authority and documented evidence of your theft. And you're standing there with a knife and bad decisions, about to throw away your freedom over pride. You think I care about prison? Crane advanced another step. I've got nothing to lose. Then you're stupider than I thought. The new voice came from the barn entrance, where Adrian stood with 4 of Miller's most trusted men, all carrying heavy tools that could serve as weapons. Because you absolutely have something to lose. Your freedom, your reputation, and possibly your life if you take one more step toward my fiancée with that knife. Crane looked around wildly, trapped. The calculation was visible on his face. Fight and definitely lose, or surrender and maybe negotiate. He chose poorly. Crane lunged at Elara, knife raised, but Elara had spent months learning to read aggressive animals, to anticipate their movements. She sidestepped, grabbed a wool bale support pole, and swung it hard into Crane's midsection. He went down, gasping. Miller kicked the knife away while Adrian's men moved in to restrain him. That, Elara said, breathing hard, was monumentally stupid. Crane was hauled to his feet, still struggling to breathe. Adrian approached, his face cold as winter stone. Thomas Crane? You're under arrest for theft and attempted assault. You'll be held until the magistrate arrives tomorrow. He turned to his men. Lock him in the equipment shed. Post guards, and someone ride to town for the constable. As Crane was dragged away, still cursing and threatening, Adrian rounded on Elara. What were you thinking, confronting a potential thief alone? I had Miller. One man against someone armed and desperate. You could have been killed. But I wasn't, and now we have proof of the theft ring and can verify how deep it goes. Elara straightened her dress, trying to calm her shaking hands. Besides, you're the one who taught me that sometimes you have to take risks to protect what matters. Adrian pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. Don't ever scare me like that again. I can't promise that. We both know I'll probably do something equally reckless next week. She pulled back enough to see his face. But I can promise I'll always fight to survive, because I have too much to live for now. The investigation that followed revealed the full extent of the conspiracy. Crane had indeed been planted by members of the Vale family, not Cassandra, but her uncle, who'd lost significant money when the engagement was broken and wanted revenge. He'd recruited Crane to steal systematically, hoping to undermine the estate's recovery and prove that Adrian had made a catastrophic mistake trusting a merchant's daughter. Instead, the plot's exposure became proof of Elara's competence. She'd spotted the discrepancies, traced the theft, and confronted the criminal, all before the losses became significant. Word spread through the county, then to London, carried by the Dowager Duchess, who made sure everyone knew how her future daughter-in-law had saved the estate from sabotage. The narrative shifted. Suddenly, Elara wasn't a scandal. She was a curiosity. A merchant's daughter so capable that even her enemies had to resort to criminal conspiracies to undermine her. The ton loved a good story, and this one was too juicy to dismiss. Invitations began arriving, not from everyone. Some doors would remain closed for years, perhaps forever. But enough of the right people expressed interest in attending the wedding that it became clear the social consequences wouldn't be as catastrophic as feared. Your mother's work? Elara asked, reading through the stack of acceptances. Mother's work, Cassandra's influence, and the simple fact that you've proven yourself too competent to ignore. Adrian sorted through his own correspondence. Though I'll admit I'm surprised by some of these. Lord Hartwell's been a family enemy for 2 generations, but here's his acceptance along with a note about discussing modern farming techniques. Competence transcends feuds, Elara said. He probably heard about our irrigation plans and wants to steal the ideas for his own estate. Then we'll share them. If Ravenmore's innovations help other estates succeed, it strengthens the entire region. Adrian set down the letters. Is that idealistic? Probably, but it's also smart business. Help enough people, and they owe you favors. Build enough goodwill, and when you need support, you'll have allies. Elara smiled. Besides, I like the idea of our legacy being more than just saving one estate. What if we could change how estates are managed across England? Now who's being idealistic? I prefer ambitious. She stood, moving to the window where spring sunshine painted the moors in gold. We've proven it works here. Why not elsewhere? The wedding day arrived with perfect weather, rare for Yorkshire, which the Dowager Duchess declared a favorable sign from Providence. Elara chose not to mention that she'd been obsessively checking weather patterns for weeks, and had deliberately selected a date with the highest probability of sunshine. She dressed in her mother's wedding gown, altered to fit and modernized with new lace. It wasn't the elaborate creation a duchess should wear, but it carried love and history, which mattered more than fashion. Mary helped with the final touches, her hands gentle as she arranged Elara's hair. You look beautiful, miss. Your mother would be so proud. I hope so. Elara touched the silver locket at her throat, feeling the familiar weight of her mother's presence. I hope she knows I fought for this, that I didn't accept the world's limitations. She knows. Mary squeezed her shoulder. Everyone knows. You've proven it every day since you arrived. The ceremony was held in Ravenmore's small chapel, with guests overflowing into the courtyard. Elara walked alone down the aisle. No father to give her away because she was giving herself, making this choice with full agency and clear eyes. Adrian waited at the altar, and when she saw his face, everything else faded to background noise. This was real. This was happening. The merchant's daughter and the duke, building something unprecedented together. The vows were traditional, but Elara and Adrian had added their own promises afterward, spoken quietly enough that only those closest could hear. I promise to trust your judgment, even when it terrifies me, Adrian said. I promise to challenge you when you're wrong and support you when you're right, Elara replied. I promise to build something worthy of your courage. I promise to never stop fighting for what we're creating together. When they kissed, the chapel erupted in applause. Even the skeptics couldn't deny the genuine emotion, the clear partnership, the sense that something significant was beginning. The celebration that followed was unlike any wedding the county had seen. Instead of rigid formality, it was a genuine feast, tenants and aristocrats mingling, estate workers dancing beside London society, everyone united in celebration of something that shouldn't have worked, but somehow did. Elara danced with Adrian, with Miller, with her father who'd traveled from London and wept openly at seeing his daughter so happy and fierce. She danced with the Dowager Duchess, who whispered advice about managing difficult aristocrats. She even danced with several lords who'd come out of curiosity and stayed because they were impressed despite themselves. But her favorite moment came near evening, when she found herself on the terrace with Cassandra, who'd arrived with Lord Pemberton and seemed genuinely happy. You did it, Cassandra said, watching the celebration below. You actually made this work. We're not done yet. There's still so much to build, so many battles to fight. You'll win them, because you fight smarter than your enemies expect. Cassandra smiled. I've been thinking about what you said that night in the stable, about Tempest being traumatized, not mean. I think I was the same way. terrified of disappointing my family, so I attacked anyone who represented a different path. But watching you refuse to be diminished, refuse to accept the world's limitations, it made me realize I could choose differently too. How's that working out? Brilliantly. Pemberton is kind, we make each other laugh, and I'm actually happy instead of just performing happiness. She touched Elara's arm. Thank you. For saving my life, yes, but also for showing me what courage looked like. I'm trying to learn from your example. After Cassandra left, Adrian found Elara still on the terrace, watching the sun set over the moors. Hiding from your own celebration? He asked, catching my breath, and thinking about everything that had to happen to get us here. She leaned into him. A year ago, I was in my father's study watching his world collapse. If someone had told me that within months I'd be married to a duke, managing an estate, changing how people think about women's capabilities, I would have thought they were insane. And now? Now I think insanity might be underrated. She turned to face him. We're going to face more challenges, more people who think this is wrong, more obstacles, more moments when we question if we can actually succeed. I know. But we'll face them together. And we'll keep building, keep innovating, keep proving that competence matters more than tradition. Elara smiled. Ready for that? I've been ready since you walked into a stable to calm a violent horse, and I realized I'd never met anyone like you. Adrian kissed her forehead. Let's change the world, Duchess Whitford Blackthorn. Just Whitford, she corrected. We agreed I'm not changing my name. The world will change it for you. Society doesn't know what to do with a duchess who keeps her maiden name. Then society will adapt. They've adapted to everything else we've thrown at them. A year later, Ravenmoor had become a model estate, visited by managers and aristocrats from across England who wanted to learn modern techniques. Elara's irrigation systems, worker treatment innovations, and accounting methods were being copied by estates that had initially dismissed her as a scandal. She'd also published a treatise on estate management under her own name, which had caused fresh scandal until the practical results became undeniable. Estates that followed her methods prospered. Those that clung to tradition continued struggling. The ton was slowly, grudgingly learning that competence mattered more than breeding. On a crisp autumn morning, Elara stood in the newly expanded stables, watching stable hands work with young horses using the gentle techniques she'd developed with Tempest. The black stallion himself stood in the pasture, no longer isolated, now surrounded by mares and playing with a foal that carried his bloodline. Healing was possible, growth was possible, change was possible. She felt Adrian's arms wrap around her from behind, his hand resting on her visibly pregnant belly. Thinking about the future? He asked. Thinking about how far we've come, how much further we can go. She covered his hand with hers. This child will grow up in a world where a woman managing an estate isn't scandalous, where competence is valued over tradition, where courage matters more than titles. You're creating that world. We're creating it, together. Elara turned in his arms. That's what I'm most proud of. Not that I saved an estate or proved critics wrong. That we built a partnership that actually works. That we're raising a child who'll see both parents as equal contributors. That's the real legacy. Speaking of legacy, Adrian said, Lord Hartwell sent another letter. He wants you to consult on his estate's irrigation problems, offering quite substantial payment. Tell him I'll consider it if he agrees to hire and train female estate managers. Time to expand the revolution beyond Ravenmoor. Adrian laughed. You're never going to stop, are you? Why would I? We've proven it works. Now we have to prove it's scalable, sustainable, replicable. She smiled. Besides, our child deserves to inherit a world better than the one we were born into. That requires constant work. They stood together watching the sun paint the moors in amber and gold. The land they'd fought for, the future they were building, the legacy that would outlast them both. Elara thought about the girl she'd been a year and a half ago, desperate, frightened, arriving at a strange estate as payment for debt. That girl had believed her worth was measured in the price of her family's survival. The woman she'd become knew differently. Worth wasn't assigned by others or limited by circumstances. Worth was claimed through courage, proven through action, and measured by the positive change you created in the world. She'd arrived at Ravenmoor as a merchant's daughter sold to settle debt. She'd survived as a woman who refused to be diminished. and she'd triumphed as a partner who transformed an estate, challenged a society, and built something unprecedented. Not because she was exceptional from birth, but because she'd refused to accept the world's limitations, fought for what she believed possible, and found someone willing to fight alongside her. "Ready to go back to the house?" Adrian asked. "Mary's prepared lunch, and your father's arriving this afternoon with news about the shipping expansion." In a moment, Elara took one last look at the thriving estate, the land that had tested and transformed her. "I just want to remember this. The girl who arrived here wouldn't recognize the woman I've become, but I think she'd be proud." "I know she would be." Adrian kissed her temple. "I'm proud of you, every day." They walked back toward Ravenmoor together, partners in every sense, ready to face whatever challenges came next. Behind them, Tempest whinnied from the pasture, no longer a traumatized, violent creature, but a proud stallion surrounded by family, healed through patience and trust. Proof that transformation was always possible for those brave enough to attempt it. The moors stretched endlessly around them, harsh and beautiful, unforgiving and full of potential. Exactly like the life Elara Whitford had chosen to build, difficult, demanding, and absolutely worth fighting for. She'd come to Ravenmoor as payment for a 300-pound debt. She was leaving as a woman who'd proven that courage, intelligence, and stubborn determination could overcome any obstacle society placed in her path. And somewhere, Elara was certain her mother was smiling. The merchant's daughter had conquered the Duke's estate, but more importantly, she'd conquered the belief that her gender, her background, or her circumstances could limit what she was capable of achieving. That was the real victory. That was the legacy that would endure. And it was only the beginning.